Here's the title of my talk.
Perfect.
And we are going to talk about maintenance issues, how geomorphic analog design can reduce those maintenance issues, and some life cycle cost and benefits. So we know debris clogging is a major issue. A lot of times people put trash racks on culverts to prevent this problem, but they can block adult fish passage and they require maintenance themselves. This is a culvert in Tyonek that every year the village would go out and clear the debris from this culvert battery in order to allow adults to pass through it. And we went ahead and replaced that with a bankful with culvert and floodplain culvert, which I think you've seen this picture in my presentations before. Beaver dams are also a major issue. 2016, we had just a single culvert here, undersized, but it really didn't look that horrible. And then a beaver moved in and plugged it up with some mud and sticks and made it a really good lake for himself. And then the community put another culvert in, another undersized culvert, and the beaver started to work on that. So this was definitely a problem site. We went in and put in a bankful with culvert and floodplain culvert and restored the stream channel. So it's, the same in the culvert as it is upstream and downstream. This site is actually the site that Alex mentioned that icing issues occurred at. So I do have photos of this, Alex, if you want them. Yeah, 2016, here's Franklin upstream. And you can see how much the ice was backing up here. It's a site that's always going to have icing issues because of the groundwater fed nature. But this bankful with culvert and floodplain culvert has, like Alex has said, has solved those icing issues. So we're not seeing nearly the problems. And this is what it looks like in the summer, just to get you a little green. Oh, and I want to mention somebody had a question about the overflow area on the Marble Way site. This site, when it was first constructed, the overflow culvert was all gravel. This is all grown up and come in. So it takes a little time, but we do usually see those re-veg pretty well. Road failures are also a problem, and we've had a lot of these in Alaska. These are often caused by buoyancy forces. So what happens is that during a flood, the culvert becomes submerged, this undersized culvert, and then the constriction of the flow causes the flow to go from what's a subcritical flow, where you've got a slow, deep flow, to supercritical flow, which is fast and shallow. So that this allows for this airspace inside the culvert, and the culvert will just basically float out of the ground. Buoyancy failures can happen actually at flows less than the designed flood due to debris, which we know is a big problem at undersized culverts. And the debris doesn't have to totally block the inlet. It just has to be sufficient that the culvert becomes submerged. And a lower discharge may actually be a worst case scenario than your design flood, because there's less water in the culvert to counteract those buoyancy forces. And I want to thank Bill Spencer at HDR who called my attention to this. They are definitely have seen this in their analysis. This culvert in Kodiak failed at less than the design flood. It's actually the culvert that Fish and Wildlife Service helped fund. It was about 50% of bankful width. This is back in the early days when, we just basically couldn't afford a bridge here. So we kind of tried to get away with doing something a little cheaper. And you can see that it didn't work out. We suspect that the logging debris upstream may have contributed to this failure. This failure actually happened at less than the designed flood. But there was a bunch of logging that went on upstream, and the ends of this culvert are bending up, which is indicative of a buoyancy failure. So debris plugging as a failure mechanism is supported by the study that the U.S. Forest Service did in Vermont after Hurricane Irene. They found that 35% of undersized culverts failed in the upper White River subbasin, and 70% of those failures were due to debris plugging. However, none of the culverts designed under the U.S. Forest Service stream simulation geomorphic guidance failed, and damage costs due to 5 crossing failures of those undersized culverts in that subbasin were $728,000. They also found that the culverts that were constructed to U.S. Forest Service stream simulation guidelines were about 9 to 22% more to construct than the undersized culverts. And I estimate that's approximately 268,000 basin wide to construct geomorphic stream simulation culverts, which results in a cost benefit ratio of 2.7. I want to note that FEMA is now recognizing the importance of upgrading culverts for higher flood flows. The city of Haines had recent historic flooding that caused several road crossing failures, and FEMA guidance or FEMA funding has been contingent on following U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service culvert design guidance for ecological function. Climate change is another issue that we're definitely concerned with. We know that in Alaska, the annual precipitation is increasing, and climate change is already causing this increase in flood frequency and magnitude in many Alaskan communities. This study, Climate Change Damages to Alaska Public Infrastructure and the Economics of Proactive Adaptation, is the name of the study. They looked at projected flood damages to roads, and in 2015 dollars, because of climate change, they found that would be $1.8 to $2.3 billion. But if we proactively adapt, we are looking at a much reduced predicted damage of $0.32 to $0.34 billion. So I wanted to look at this at kind of our typical culvert construction project. This cost analysis is for a rural community off the road system, so a little more expensive culvert than you might find in the Mat-Su Borough. I used a 12-foot bankful width, and I'm assuming that the equipment and materials all arrive by barge. This is 2021 cost data. So the net construction cost increase here is $38,000 for these projects, or about 11%. Notice that the culvert on the left is designed for a 100-year flood, where the one on the right is a 50-year flood. The one on the left is 1.25 bankful width, and the one on the right is 0.75 times bankful width, which is equivalent to about 0.9 of the ordinary high. So that $38,000 in cost increase, 11% on this project, if you're only replacing the culvert, I mean, that still seems worth it. And when you look at the downstream costs that we're talking about here, but when considering the additional cost in a large road project that might be $100 million, the cost increase is just almost negligible. And here's another study in Wisconsin that looked at 461 undersized culverts. They found that culverts sized at 1.1 times the bankful width resulted in fiscal lifetime net benefits to 58% of the culverts sampled. So that means when you look at the lifetime cost of all those maintenance and failure costs that we're going to see with undersized culverts and clearing out the debris and getting rid of the ice, over the life, average, it's actually cheaper to put in geomorphic design culverts. We know that fish love functioning culverts and functioning streams, but the benefits in Alaska, and we know that the benefits in Alaska go beyond reduced road maintenance and flooding cost. Ecologically functioning stream culverts not only increase habitat for fish that are integral to our economy, they provide a renewable resource for commercial fishing, tourism, and they provide for a subsistence lifestyle that is important to many Alaskans. A little bit about the commercial fishing industry. I thought this was interesting to see the relative importance of the seafood industry in Alaska versus all of the other kind of big industries. So it's a really important industry, and our maintenance of the habitat that supports this industry is important as well. So at the end there, I will just take questions if there are any, and if